So you're saying that you have got to get your 2 cents in about the state of the world today. Kevin, what is the state of the world today? What is on your mind about that?
Quite a few things. It's funny, I try to look at things from to include like a historical perspective on where we're at. And I just see the state of our country and the world. And I've known so many impressive, intelligent leaders and people that have contributed so much. And I just wonder, where are they sometimes? And myself included, right? It's, you can't point the finger. You got to look at yourself first. But there's people fighting in trenches in Ukraine and Russia, which was the same thing we did over 100 years ago. So it's, yeah, what have we learned or not learned? And yeah, just I think the disenfranchisement of our people and how low they trust or rank the government and Congress. And it's just sad because I know the quality of people here, and I would recommend quite a few people in my small circle that would be able to inspire our country to, I don't know, it doesn't, like me, I'm independent. There's no left, there's no right. It's just, I think if you have good quality people leading, you can have good quality discussions and figure out obstacles. And I just wish that was happening for, because there's a lot of people suffering right now.
Do you think that the wars taking place today are driven by lack of leadership, or is that more a commentary on just the state of humanity? Like you said, we have been fighting fights like this for hundreds, thousands of years, actually.
Mm.
If we really want to take it back, we're really, we've got some more technical things on the battlefield that we see today, but in large part, the same gruesome kind of wars are still taking place. Do you think that is driven by a lack of leadership?
I think to your point, it is probably a part of the human condition, but I would also point to some of the leaders that we've had who've been able to maintain some semblance of, I guess, understanding with other countries. I think it's a little bit unnerving when there's 19, 20-year-old kids fighting in trenches, and then the leader of that country is sitting behind a large oval desk with a suit on. Just doesn't equate. The vision of a leader for me is like Leonidas, leading by example. And I wish we had more of that today. I think that people would probably be less likely to throw kids in a trench if they had to spend a night or two with them.
It does certainly beg the question, and this is a veteran focused podcast, so we can be selfish here for a second, but it is very interesting to see the disparity between the decisions made at the higher levels of government and the people who really feel the repercussions of those.
Mm-hmm.
I had posted a thing a while back. I don't have it here in front of me, but the amount of presidents that the US has had that have served in the military at one point or another, it was actually a shockingly high number
Yeah.
compared to what I thought it would be. But of course, in recent years, that has quite literally fallen off a cliff just in the last 20 plus or so. Do you think that it ought to be a requirement for maybe the president of the United States or other kind of senior Congress level decision makers to have spent time in the military?
No, I don't think it's a requirement, or I don't think it should be a requirement. I think it certainly adds perspective and value and appreciation, given that a lot of the influence and power that is wielded by political leaders is because of the 20-year-olds wearing uniforms and the technology that they man. So, in some ways, a deep appreciation for what that means, that life of service, would help leaders, I think, in the context of their decisions. But I don't think it should be a requirement. I think that people can be empathetic leaders enough to understand that they should safeguard the people of their nations. It's a good question, but at this point, I wouldn't necessarily force something like that.
What is the takeaway and how we can be better as a country from that? commentary do you think? We are maybe somewhat engaged in this conflict in Ukraine, and the Israel conflict kind of rearing its ugly head is to be determined on how the US
Mm.
gets involved with that. There have been a couple of things just in the last day or so about some attacks on Navy ships over in the Red Sea and a couple other conflicts that are just, I don't know, it's the burner seems to be getting turned up in the Middle East, that's for sure, just with varying groups. What do you think that we ought to be doing about that? Because there are some points that we, like, being in an active conflict is actually good for our country. Like it brings unity, and I'm not trying to warmonger at all,
Yeah, I
but
know
there,
what you're
it does bring a sense of unity to the country. And when we have a common enemy, but in quote unquote peacetime, it really, recruiting falls off a cliff, and it seems like we don't have that kind of united front. Do you feel the same way? And if so, I guess, what do you think ought to be done?
Yeah, it's almost as if there's an external opposing force that poses a greater danger than the one sitting across the proverbial aisle from you. Then you focus on that and you band together. I remember that after 9/11 distinctly, there was American flag stickers on everybody's car driving down the highway, and it brought people together. But I wouldn't want there to be a massively negative event like that to be the only reason we come together for something. There's got to be something more inspirational, more empowering that brings people together than just shit. We got to share this foxhole. I don't know, man. My answer before I point fingers is always to look at myself is like, how am I responsible for contributing to this somehow? What am I doing or not doing within my scope of influence that can make a difference? A lot of times, sometimes I feel like trying to reach too far when the biggest battle is the one within. And it's how can I make myself a better leader by example for my kids, for my community, for the people around me, for my family. That can probably sometimes be the biggest influence than pointing fingers at somebody that's maybe trying to do their best too.
We're going to get into a lot of what that kind of inner conflict looks like. And as somebody who spent 20 plus years in the military, that is something that takes front and center in the conversation, because the longer that you're in, you're dealing with bigger and bigger issues internally. And then even on the flip side, getting out and still continuing to manage those things. Do you want to take a couple minutes here and give me your background, just sum up your life in 2 to 3 minutes, because that
Yeah.
really just makes you feel good that you can talk about all that in such a short time. But give me a couple minute backstory on getting you here in front of me.
Yeah, no problem. In a nutshell, I joined the military when I was 17, grew up in Fresno, California, and I just knew I wanted to live a life of adventure. Basically, my grandfather was actually one of the first SEALs. He was a UDT guy. He was in Bud's class 21 somewhere in, I can't remember, 1950 something, early 50s. And I remember just hanging out with him, and he would tell me stories about blowing up obstacles in the South Pacific and this, that, and the other thing. And I was like, holy shit, I want to do that. That'd be a lot of fun. So I joined the military, went straight to Bud's, and I pretty much grew up in the teams. I had a lot of mentors, had a lot of male figures that I looked up to that helped shape me and instill the values of the community. Did 22 years. Half of it was spent in training and operational roles and deployments. And the other half of that was spent in roles where you give back to the community as far as being an instructor or teaching. Some of the more valuable jobs I had was as an instructor at Bud's. That was pretty rewarding for me, helping to shape the next generation and working at the Naval Academy too. But so I finished up 22 years and then jumped into the private sector. It's been a whirlwind. It's been about 4 years now. Still trying to figure out what I'm going to do when I grow up. But I've always come back to how do I continue to coach and mentor and help others really see the light within themselves and walk a path of meaning and excellence. Man, that's my North Star. And I do some coaching with that, some speaking, but that's what I keep gravitating towards. Yeah, man, always looking for opportunities to just be of value and help people out.
Was there a specific moment in time when your mentality shifted from fighting your own singular fight to trying to coach and bring others along with you?
I think they're one and the same. For me, I get the most satisfaction and joy out of helping people overcome obstacles or have those aha moments, or when someone says, "Holy shit, I never knew I could do that," or "I can't believe I did that." That lights me up. So I almost think that sometimes my salvation is tied to others, which can be a little unbalanced. So what I'm working on right now is really just being fully content and in the moment myself, without tying my self-worth to how I help other people. But for a long time, and I would say even still now, they're pretty entwined.
You are the second former SEAL that I've talked to today. I was on an introductory call with a gentleman named Jimmy May, who was the XO of Buds at one point in time. Just chatting with him and going to get him on the podcast here soon.
Nice.
One of the things that he had told me that you also just mentioned was the value of early mentors. And that's a resounding theme I'm starting to pick up from your community. Is there somebody or maybe a group of people or maybe even a lesson that really reverberated throughout your time in the service that was drilled into you from a mentor?
Oh man, there's so many. I think one of the big ones, the first one that popped in my mind was from a very close friend, Master Chief, and he just always cautioned me to seek both sides of a story, to be patient, to slow down. I think a lot of times, and rightfully, people in our communities default aggressive or, "Hey, let's get after it." But then there's times where wisdom allows you to, okay, we're leaning in, but we're also going to step back and look around and see what else might be at play. Because nowadays, rarely is a solution super simple, black and white. So he was pretty pivotal in teaching me, like, okay, what am I missing? What am I not thinking about right now? Be patient. So that one's the first one that popped in my head, but I'm sure you could literally probably fill a book with some of the wisdom that has trickled down over the years in that community.
Luckily, I know that there's some people in their community that get flack for going out and writing books and getting on the promotional circuit, but I think that you're exactly right. There is a lot of knowledge that's to be gained in very controversial positions and spots where life or death may be on the line. It really will test the things that you maybe know or think you know to be true.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. It's funny, when I was in the teams, anybody that got out, wrote a book or advertised, seal this or seal that, I had an immediate disdain for them, even friends, which is unfortunate. And I just didn't understand the nature of the world they were living in, their perspective. Now I consider it more of a spectrum of, on one side is the guy who gets out and never says a word. And on the other side is the guy that probably says too much. I probably try to find myself in a place where if I was sitting in a team room, would my teammates appreciate, and would all of the former frogmen that have gone before me nod in approval and say, okay, you're okay to speak this way about your experience in the teams, like you've still honored your legacy and your past. So that's a fine line, but yeah, still working on it.
There's certainly an element of humility that's required in all parts of the military. I think there's people who haven't gone and done like maybe as aggressive or as many deployments or however, whatever your measurement is for achievement in the military that want to tout certain things. And I think humility is required across the board. The I'm this because I once did this is, like you said, it's a thin line and very easy to come across as big headed or braggadocious.
Yep. Yeah, it's to each their own. I try not to judge folks anymore.
One of the things that you had said was that the default method of operation was aggression, or like you wanted to, the default was aggressive. You needed to be taking action.
Mhm.
And within that community, that is, I think that's interesting. And I'd love to pull on the thread of that, because when you and I were talking about this before, you were talking about a massive change that was going on in that community, shifting away from the physical regimen being the most important thing to more character based or character
Mhm.
driven, or looking for things beyond, hey, can you pass this PST? Talk to me about that change and what was maybe inspiring that change.
Yeah, I think every community and every culture goes through evolutions, and we're no different. At our core is still service and humility, because humility helps us to constantly learn. But there's definitely times where what makes a good team guy gets skewed a little bit culturally. When I came in before 9/11, it was, there was pockets, play hard, work hard. Second, there was a lot of just time spent where it wasn't necessarily honing your craft as an operator. And this is my personal experience. I'm sure some guys were, but I think culturally was not so much how do we select and train high character individuals first. It was more like how do we get the strongest, baddest people in the door, and then our culture will shape them. But the thing with that is if you don't have a very clear culture, your shaping outcomes are probably going to diverge from what you expect. And I think what our community did, which is really good, was they put together the SEAL ethos as a mechanism to reground us into who we are and who we need to be for our country. And that I think that really helps us when we select and train and look at ourselves and our teammates. We use the ethos as a measuring tool. And I think has gone and helped us be very intentional with the people that we have.
What are the components of that ethos, and how do you think about applying that to somebody who's going through selection?
Yeah, at first, for example, when I was at the Naval Academy, when I first got there, the original selection method was more of how's your peer recommendations within your classmates? How well did you do on the PST, which is swimming, push-ups, sit-ups, and a run? And then what's your GPA? I think what we tried to advance towards is more of a whole man concept, which is I can train someone to run, I can train someone to swim, I can work with you in the pool if you suck at drown proofing, but it's really hard for me to capture lessons on character once you've made it through the pipeline. And let's say you're in a remote location in a foreign country, and if you make an error of character, that's going to have lasting implications at a strategic level, at a political level. So what we then did was, okay, how do we find people that align with our ethos that are all still physically competent, very strong, obviously intelligent, adaptable, can think, but how do we seek out grit, humility, teamwork, selflessness, determination, those things?
Was there a specific event or maybe series of events that caused this shift? To me, you called it an identity crisis almost, and what you're describing is a pretty dramatic shift in how people come into that community, which is exclusive and all the barriers to entry that you could think of. What was the impetus for like that uh, kind of coming to its head and redefining what it means to be a SEAL?
I think leadership in general, I was very junior at the time, so I didn't go out there and help create the ethos. I think leadership at the time realized that, hey, we have a lot of high performers here, but we can't really trust them all the time. Like, I know these guys can break down doors. I know they can jump out of planes. I know they can shoot, but I don't know what they're going to do at 2 a.m. when we all go out in town, or I don't know if they're ready for the increased responsibility of, like, man, protecting ourselves, because sometimes we would shoot ourselves in the foot by making a silly mistake. Don't get me wrong, the teams are very high performing and always have been, but I think it was just a necessary kind of regrouping. Like, let's take a break, let's look in the mirror, and let's be very clear about who we want to be as people. And I think I did that personally just last week. I had to put the brakes on and say, okay, what does it mean to be me? And I think creating the ethos for the SEAL team was just a way of being clear of who we want to be. And then that way, when something diverges from that path, it's like it stands out very clearly. So you can have something stand out like, hey, man, these are our values. This is our ethos. You did X. It's not compatible. Let's fix this.
Talk to me about this thing that happened this last week with you. I think the thing that you're getting at is extremely important, because when you don't have a defined culture, values, morals, all of those kind of big words that we talk about, when those aren't clearly and expressly stated, it's extremely easy to take the day as it comes rather than being in charge of, rather we're deciding things as we go rather than as things come up we apply what we
Mhm.
know and believe and how we want to act to that. It's the reverse. Like, how does this action or event that's taking place in my life today influence the things that I believe?
Yeah.
So maybe I'd love to just talk about what happened, if you don't mind sharing.
Yeah. First thing I think of is the famous quote is, a man who has a why to live for can bear almost anyhow. And character to me is how you respond to life when life calls to you. And for me, I found myself in a few situations where I wasn't very clear about who I was, how to respond to situations. And I was like, fuck, that's on me. Because in today's world, when you have the war for attention going on, you better be very strong and centered in who you are and where you're going. Because if not, you're going to drift off course. There's a lot of crosswind happening. I wanted to just recenter myself and be clearer on, at this point in my life, and I always reserve the right to adapt and change. But at this point in my life, what am I striving for? What's my goal? And also, probably more importantly, how am I going to choose to respond to the events around me to get there? And so I just took some time, man, to unplug mentally and put the big truth mirror in front of me and do some writing, do a few writing exercises, and just rehone a little bit. And okay, just reset. Nothing crazy. I'm not trying to reinvent myself, but let's reset. Choose who you want to be and then move forward.
Are there any writing exercises specifically that you found to be the most helpful, just in terms of trying to, like you said, reground yourself in what you think or maybe even believe?
Yeah, there's quite a few. It's funny, I chose to write as if, okay, as if I was Leonidas. Like, or I try to think of who are the most inspirational people that I can think of. And if they were my board of directors, like what would they tell me to do? Anyone from my wife, my friends, Jesus, Gandhi, like all these people, just alive, dead, it doesn't matter. But if these people, I had a list of like 20 or so people, if they were all sitting there and saying, okay, Kevin, you brought us all back from the dead and we're going to give you about 10 minutes of our time. What are your questions? And I would just pose them like, shit, what should I do, guys? When that just an exercise helped me out. Also, man, reading spiritual texts always grounds me, whether it's the Bible, Bhagavad Gita, all those things that I think have elements of spiritual truth in them. Going back to those, I did an Ikigai exercise with a friend of mine, the modern version of it, but and then just ran a marathon solo on the beach in the sand, just along the coast, and just spent some time with myself. And I feel like that helped, even though I was slow as hell.
I'm guessing your run time has slowed down just a little bit.
Oh yeah.
Just the fact that you completed it, though, that means you still got it.
Slow and certainly not pretty, but we got it done.
No, that's so important. And those are almost like mandatory or something that should take place. Almost, I don't know what the cadence is that's right for everybody, but maybe quarterly, maybe monthly. I know for myself, like I was just saying a few minutes ago, it is so incredibly easy to lose what you're chasing. And you end up, like I said, you apply what is happening in my life today as the means to determine what you believe. And that is a really quick way to be influenced, like you said, by crosswinds of whether it's social media or the next bright and shiny goal that you meet somebody cool that does something and you're like, oh man, maybe I want to do that, or maybe I want to change my belief system to this other thing. And that's a really good way, I'd imagine, to end up at the end of the road being your life without a lot of meaningful progress in one direction.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a great point. Another very influential person for me is Dr. Jim Lair. He does a lot of work with character and morals and ethics, and he's worked with professional athletes and business leaders. But that tombstone exercise is something to you just literally write your own epitaph, put your tombstone up there and write, okay, man, if some stranger walks by or your kids are going to tell the world who you were, what do you want to say? And that kind of realigns once again, typically with how you serve and what you mean for others, not what you mean for yourself. In terms of, for instance, I ran a marathon on the beach like that. Don't waste the ink space on that. Like, how did I help someone else run their marathon? It would be more important to me.
It's wild how on a long enough time horizon of doing something, you end up giving back to others when completing something, whether it's a physical activity, whether it's some objective. You get there, you get it done, and then maybe you go back to the well, you go a second time, a third time. The satisfaction, the incremental satisfaction of that over time is less and less every time. And you end up, if you want to stay in that field, you end up wanting to help others do the same. And I think that that seems to be a through line in a lot of the things that you talk about, trying to give back and bring other people up with you.
100%. All of anytime I've said, or I try to also reflect back, hey, maybe when you're most proud of yourself, or when did you feel like you were doing something right? And it's always when I'm helping somebody else or connecting with my family in meaningful ways, right? Like throwing my kid in the air and just seeing him smile. And this is life right now. Be here now. Don't stray. I have to be mindful of that, because it's real easy, like you said, to kind of illusions of grandeur. And my wife told me about a year ago, I was talking about, oh, I want to help these people do this. She's like, there's 3 people in this house that need your help right now. I was like, yeah, nothing like a mama bear to square you away and refocus you on what's important. But yeah, It's the human story, the human thread is how do we give back? How do we help others? How are we lifting others up? How are we, through our experiences, making the experiences of others better? That's the timeless human tradition.
You mentioned that story about your wife making that comment, and I experienced something similar a few months back. My wife was 8 or 9 months pregnant and in a dire position. And here I am, like working on all of these like side project things and filling my time with things that I probably shouldn't be doing. Why is it that we don't often see what's right in front of our face in terms of what's most important? Because I think that if you were to ask maybe you and I in the same position, somebody would say, "Hey, what's the most important thing to you?" You'd with in a snap, you'd say, "Oh, my family." You
Mhm.
wouldn't even hesitate. But the actions that you're doing on a day-to-day basis don't reflect that same belief system. Why do you think that that is? What drives that disconnect?
I think it goes back to where we started, right? Is being intentional and what it means to be you, um, and how you choose to respond to life, what you prioritize. And I think if you just keep that at the forefront, doesn't mean you got to lose yourself to someone else, right? That's counterproductive. But I just know now because I've ingrained it in my head. Okay, when I'm with my kids, I'm with my kids. Like phone goes away, phone goes down, and just trying to be very self aware. You can see little snippets, even myself. Like I'll be looking at my phone and my kid will be like, Dad. I'm like, okay, time to fucking stop. This is not who I want to be. So I think it's an accumulation of coming back to center in a big major way, but then how do you build that into your daily practice of living and then giving yourself some grace, man. We all fall off. We all fall off. So just be like, all right, you're good. Get back on track. Let's keep going.
There's a couple of pieces there that are required. You need to have establish what kind of that end state looks like, even if you maybe never actually achieve it. You need to say, hey, this
Mm.
is what I'm working towards. But there's also the second element of that. You don't just need a heading, but you also need a mechanism to get back on track because we fuck up a lot. And
Mhm.
so you need to know when things are not in alignment and then have a way to reset yourself. And it sounds like maybe that's going on a big run and doing some writing was it for you. I'm sure that it's probably different for everybody, but some kind of mechanism to reground is critical.
Yeah, for me in the SEAL teams, it's easy because your teammate will come right up to me. Or I remember one of my closest friends came up to me once, and I had fallen off the wagon for just a few weeks. I was doing a whole bunch of evals and paperwork and everything like that. He comes up to me and says, "Hey, what's up? Fuck." And I had gained just a few pounds, but it was like, oh, damn. And so you have that corrective measure in a SEAL community because that standard is visible constantly and nonstop. And it's any deviation stands out immediately, whether it's your attitude, your performance. But since leaving the community, oh, you got to do a little bit more of that on your own, unless you're with a very intentional, proactive group of people that you're in regular contact with, or you can leverage a relationship like a friendship or a spouse, like my wife. Babe, am I on track? Like, how's everything? But ultimately, it comes down to me now. Unfortunately, I don't have my buddies to square me away every day. I wish I did, but yeah, you got it. Otherwise, man, the world doesn't want you to be necessarily awesome because there's a war for attention. And if you're giving your attention to someone else, it's not going on your path.
As we're talking about physical performance, like you're talking about maybe being called out by a buddy, and we've been hashing out some of the mental aspects of staying grounded and aligned with our own personal goals. A subject that you have spent considerable time talking about and writing about is what you call the human OS or
Mm.
human operating system.
Mhm.
Let's dig into what the variables of that are, and we'll hash out how you think that we as individuals can optimize that.
Yeah, no, great question. Man, I think this kind of stems from my personal experience. When I was young as a SEAL, its go-to was always suck it up, right? No matter what you're going through, how hard you get knocked down, how cold, how hot, how tired, how hungry, you just suck it up and move forward. And that gets ingrained in you. And I think for a lot of other folks as well, even in business, police, firefighters, is like, it's just a grind. That's how it's supposed to be. We just suck it up and keep moving. And the default then usually becomes maxing out our stress response system, right? So now we're not, because it's so resilient, because we are so amazing, this operating system, right? The human body, mind, body, spirit, because it's so awesome, it'll overcompensate for our lack of ability to be intentional about recovery and regeneration and adaptability. The problem is after however many years, 20 plus years of living in that default mode, it's not sustainable. And you start to feel it, whether it's cognitive performance decline, emotional hardening, if you will, physical breakdown. So at one of my last jobs, I was working with a really good friend of mine, and we were trying to help people in healthcare, like surgeons, nurses who are working in ERs and ICUs. Very, very strenuous, very demanding work. They would go in and they're like, oh, yeah, during the height of COVID, 70% of the patients we saw that came to us would die. I was like, holy shit. It made me think of D-Day. What's more comparable to that than just storming the beaches and like the emotional toll that it took? And these were very strong, amazing people. And what we found is we had to get them to understand their insides because they were tapped out of just sucking it up and powering through. So we coined the phrase, let's move from endurance to performance. That is, endurance is, I'm just going to pack a bunch of rocks in my bag and I'm going to keep going until either I break or until I can't meet the standard anymore. And so we had to change the narrative to how are you going to experience a stressor, but then have the means to give your body the chance to adapt psychologically, emotionally, physically, to build in that recovery time. If you're only getting 5 or 6 hours of sleep, how is that the best possible 5 or 6 hours of sleep? And the best way to do that was to get people to understand their human operating system and how to actually operate it and go from red line to orange, green, that time. So that, in a nutshell, was the human operating system and how to just leverage our own physiology, our psychology, so that we can not do more, but so we can actually just be more present. Most of these people, they're like, I don't have a concern in the OR. My biggest concern is when I come home, I feel like I'm failing as a dad, or I can't connect as a mom anymore. That just crushes you because these people are there serving on the front lines of society. So I felt really compelled to help them. And I think one of the biggest ways was just to get them to be able to control a little bit more of their own selves.
I have to imagine that individuals that are worried about getting that last 5% of performance, maybe you're a 95% performer. If you're at that point and worrying about getting that last 5%, there's more to be gained by making your 95% that you are giving the most efficient possible than trying to eke out a couple marginal points that aren't really going to move the needle in a major way. Would that be another way of saying what you're saying?
Such a good question. To me, if you're in that 90th percentile and you're shooting for 100, to me, that means that the nature of your circumstance, your environment is such that you are willing to go there, but you have to know that it's not sustainable. And to me, it'd be like you're trying for an Olympic gold medal. It's like you are going to eke out every last possible bit of human performance you can. not like being a dad is any less important, but the mechanisms and time and energy necessary to get yourself there is requires a lot of time, effort, and energy where there's not too much left for other elements of your life. So in some ways, best action we helped people with was sometimes shedding a layer and really prioritizing things in their life and saying, okay, what can I let go of, or what can I deprioritize, or what can I objectively look at and make sure that I'm not giving this a full on stress response when it only deserves minor attention. So I think that was really effective, is helping people think in terms of energy. Like, how much energy are you going to spend on your tasks? Which ones require the most mental focus? Okay, let's do those at the most optimal times, and then build in some recovery, and then you can knock out all your emails and all the other bullshit later. But you don't want to give the emails the same amount of intensity as everything else. So it's almost like treating your tasks on a spectrum of energy requirements.
That's interesting. I haven't really thought about it that way, but there are certain tasks which obviously require a higher cognitive load than others. I have thought a little bit about this in a different context. There's a book by a neuroscientist called The Organized Mind. And one of the key tenets of the book, it talks about you only have limited decision-making power in a day. Let's say that you have 100 units of decision-making ability in one day. And if you spend all of that very early on things that are unimportant and then try to do important things later in the day, like, it will be more difficult. Even though you may feel fine physically, you have drained your decision-making capacity substantially by that point. And I think that's particularly interesting when looking at certain standout historical figures. Like, there's a whole host of people, but I think of specific examples where people will choose to wear the same clothing every single day because it lowers, not the exact same clothes, but let's say that you have 25 of the same black shirt because, hey, this is a good shirt and I don't need to think about what shirt I'm going to wear every day. It's just, this is it. I find that interesting.
Cool.
What's that?
I'm trying to convince my wife that's cool.
Oh, do you do the same?
Black shirts. But your comment about the energy is spot on. To get your brain's 3% of your body weight, it uses roughly 30% of your energy requirements for the day. And you said, hey, I start with 100 units. We probably don't, because of how we sleep at night, if we're hydrated, if we're like cardiovascular system, we have the right nutrition and energy. So what really helps getting the idea of energy across to these folks is, let's say you wake up at 75% because of life happens, you got kids and sleep and whatever else. How do you dole that out in the best possible way? And then how do you, as you mentioned earlier, make sure that your brain is going to put energy to where it thinks it needs it most, right? It's going to put it in the front of your brain for decision-making, creativity, or it's going to put it in the protective part of your brain, right? The amygdala, where it's like, hey, this is fight or flight. And you're constantly making assessments of the world around you. If you feel threatened, that energy is going to go to defense mode. If you feel engaged, the energy is going to go to the front of your brain and you're going to be cognitively wired, so to speak, for optimal decision making. So if you think in those terms, it helps you to make sure that you're spending your energy in the right places and you're being very judicious about what gets your energy, because you can recharge, right? But it is a finite resource, especially if you're a heart surgeon walking the halls and you got 10 things flying at you. Like, I want my heart surgeon to be very energy efficient. And like, when I'm on the operating table or whoever else right there, they have the capacity to focus instead of being worn out, tired, stressed. So I think your point about on this managing energy is critical.
Let's say that you were going to sit down with somebody who is looking for coaching and they want you to help them walk through and optimize their human OS. Maybe let's walk through what are the things that you would hit on with them kind of, and we can even use me or use yourself as an example here of let's go through the items that you would talk about specifically, and then maybe any frameworks or tips, anything that you've got on those specific areas about how we can optimize them.
For me, it starts out with what's meaningful to you in your life. What is important? No shit important. What are those things on your tombstone that you want to make as your North Star? And the discussion before you talk about sleep and stress and breath work and hydration and working out is you have a mind and a body to do the soul's work. What is your soul's work? And being very clear about that. Because when you're clear on what your purpose is, what your ultimate service is to others, that then gives weight to the decisions you make that support how you manage your energy, right? If it's, hey, I'm waking up at 4:30 to go for a run because of this and this, if those reasons are clear, like I'm with. So I think I would start there is get a general sense of where they are in life, what's important to them, and just not like I'm doing now, but like really just listen with intent and just really try to pull on those important soul strings, if you will. And that would be a starting place and figure out what are the primary roles of this person, like personally, relationally, who are those critical relationships like for you is who's in your family? Why does that matter? What are you doing professionally? And then we start and work our way down until we get to how you build your day so that your energy is flowing into those items as efficiently as possible.
Do you get really tactical with doing a time audit and like breaking down like just to the nitty gritty about how people spend their time specifically and I don't know, measuring that against the total time available during a day?
I don't get like spreadsheet deep in that. What I do ask is I'll think in terms of, okay, give me your average day. Like tell me your typical day. And then I'll go through the day and I'll think in terms of what are the energy requirements of that day? When do you want to be at peak performance, right? Because you are going to have this moment, but you're also going to have these moments. And it's how throughout the day are you organizing yourself so that those things that require a lot of energy are going to be here, and those things that don't maybe are going to be down here in recovery rest mode. That would be how I listen, but I do think it's important for people to say, here's my day, but here's my ideal day. And then the delta between those is, okay, here's how we can manage energy and here's how we can manage time to decrease the delta between those days.
Of the people that you've talked to, coached, and worked with, is there one common issue that stands out amongst all of them? And you could say a lot or most people struggle with this one specific thing.
I think a lot of times people having the ability to give themselves some grace. Sometimes people don't appreciate or understand how much or how hard they are. And we are our own worst critics usually. And I've seen so many inspiring people just behind the scenes working constantly every day who would say, oh, I'm just doing so and so, or oh, this isn't important, or oh, I fucked that up. And it's sometimes the best thing I can do for them is just say, stop and look back. Look back at yourself 2 years ago. Are you further along? Are you better off? Have you grown as a person? Have you learned? Have you reached people? Oh yeah, definitely. And it's okay. Sometimes I think that would be a big thing is just give yourself some grace. Shit's hard. So I think that's a big one. I think thinking in terms of energy has been a big one that has helped a lot of people. Sometimes think about time, but you can't really do shit about time, but you can do a lot with your personal energy and how you expend and recover it. So I think that has been helpful.
If you had to sum up what the one most important thing that you could, or that I or anybody listening could take away from you, what do you think that that would be?
Damn. Now give yourself a chance. We are capable of a lot, meaning not so much that we can do a lot of things, but we can be very present in a lot of environments and in a lot of people's lives in meaningful ways. I would say give yourself a chance and get really good at self-awareness, being study yourself, spend a lot of time focusing outwards, right? Eyes and ears on the world. It's really important to turn that focus inward sometimes and really understand where you're at and then who you want to be.
It's very easy to lose sight of that for a lot of the reasons that we've discussed here. Lots of distractions trying to get us off course from the thing that matters most. And most of the time, that's focusing on you and your small family unit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Kevin, this has been a really fun conversation. I appreciate you taking some time to join me. Where can people go to find out more about you if they want to connect with you? I know you do a whole host of different activities, but anything that you want to shout out, or if people want to reach out, where can they do?
Yeah, man, no problem. Like I said, I'm currently in development mode, putting some things together as far as coaching events and leadership experiences. I do have recently jumped into the Twitterverse, so I'm in Twitter, although I'm not super active, but Arate Warrior, and then LinkedIn, just Kevin Stark. But man, happy to help folks out or just be a sounding board or folks reach out. I'll definitely hit you back.
Awesome. Kevin, I appreciate your time, man. Thank you so much.
Yeah, man, anytime.
Thanks so much for tuning in today. Your listenership helps me better educate people like you and the rest of our nation's military, both past and present, on building a successful life outside of military service. If you're looking for more ways the top vets are leading more effective lifestyles, building businesses, and using the resources designed specifically for you, press here for a selection of some of the best clips. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date, and I will be talking with you soon.